Good afternoon. Today I'm going to be reviewing the Vulcain Skindiver Nautique. This watch is available from vulcain.ch for €1,890. Vulcain have a rich brand heritage. They were founded in 1858 in Switzerland. This piece, the Skindiver Nautique, is a heritage reissue of the original Skindiver Nautique made in 1960, made to modern day specification. Now, unfortunately, I can't show you the watch box that the Skindiver Nautique comes in because Vulcain supplied it in this cardboard box, which has foam on the inside, and I'll show it to you nonetheless. This is how Vulcain supply pieces for review to press and watch reviewers. So inside we have a protective foam panel, and in the base we have a block of foam which has slots in it. This does a good job of protecting the watch in shipping. And as I've detailed, this is how they supply press and watch reviewers with watch boxes. It's a shame they didn't supply the watch box because I'd like to show it to you. Now, with regards to items, they only supplied this item. There is no warranty card, and again, I would have liked to have shown that to you, but unfortunately they didn't supply it. But they did supply this, which is effectively the owner's instruction manual. It says instructions for use. Consult the user guide section on our website, vulcain.ch. This is disappointing. Previously, Vulcain used to supply their pieces with a printed booklet, owner's instruction manual, with clear, concise diagrams, instructions in English, detailing the operation of the caliber used in their piece, such as this piece, the ETA caliber 2824-2 automatic. This is a production cost cutting measure in order to maximise profit margin per piece, because of course it's less expensive to print one card with simply consult the user guide section on our website versus printing an owner's instruction manual booklet with clear, concise diagrams. So disappointing to see this. I would prefer to see Vulcain retain the original method of owner's instruction manual, which is a printed booklet. As an alternative, they could simply have a card with a QR code that could be scanned with an Android or iPhone to download the owner's instruction manual. That would be a credible alternative. But there we are. I can only review what I'm supplied by the brand. So with regards to the specifications of the piece, we have a 38mm case diameter. We have a 44.5mm lug-to-lug measurement, a thickness of 12.3mm and a lug width of 20mm. The flat link bracelet tapers from 20mm at the lugs down to 16mm at the 2-button push micro adjustment clasp. So I'm pleased to see we have the correct perfection personified 20-16 taper, which is correct for a 38mm head of the piece. 2-button push micro adjustment clasp is very well finished, beautiful luster to the body, nice large mirror polished bevels on the edges which delete the sharp edges, and flawless mirror polishing to the flanks and the pushers, which are correctly proportioned on the left and the right hand flanks. Also good attention to detail because we have an embossed Vulcain emblem, as you can see, and it's also mirror polished to a very high standard. No sharp edge to the top edge or the low edge, and doesn't have sharp corners. Undercuts to the flanks have been deburred and chamfered very well, and the mirror polishing is excellent. Correctly proportioned, it does give the vintage aesthetic of a 1960s clasp, which was made from pressed stainless steel, but this is a solid milled stainless steel clasp with a heavier gauge, and although visually it just looks like a standard pressed 2-button push clasp, it's actually a micro adjustment clasp with a ratcheting mechanism inside, which we'll test. So very aesthetically pleasing, beautiful luster to it. We have a boxed top hat double dome sapphire crystal with clear AR coating on the underside, and the clear anti-reflective coating does an outstanding job of reducing the glare and the highly reflective nature of the silver mirror polished baton handset, which are faceted versus flat. Nice profile to the box top hat crystal, does give the crystal a vintage aesthetic as per acrylic crystals which were used in the 1960s, but of course one has the added benefit of sapphire crystal being harder and more scratch resistant than acrylic, and one doesn't get the distortion and magnification effect one gets with a thick acrylic crystal used in the 1960s, because this is double domed. It's domed on the underside, domed on the top side. So although it does add some thickness to the piece, 2mm of thickness, this piece is still only 12.3 thick, which is very impressive for a 200 meter water resistant piece. The dial is absolutely beautiful. Now, to clarify, Vulcain produced the Skindiver Nautique in a plethora of dial colours, and they also offer this version, the blue version, with 2 different lume options. You can have patina lume, which looks like the radium lume used on the original 1960 version, or white lume. Both of those versions use the same C3 superlume nova, but one version has white lume in daylight, one version has patina lume in daylight, so it comes down to your personal taste. Of the 2 options, in terms of the lume, I prefer this white lume C3 superlume nova version versus the patina version of C3. Perfect colour tone match between the printed indices on the dial and also the baton hands. You can see they're both white, they're not more cream or white on the dial or the handset. Now, the dial layouts will particularly appeal to Vulcain purist collectors because, as I've detailed, this Skindiver Nautique is a heritage reissue of the original Skindiver Nautique from 1960. Vulcain have done a very good job of replicating the original dial printing. The large white minute ticks are exactly the same as the original. The printed indices are exactly the same as the original. The only notable difference is the original 1960 Skindiver Nautique used radium for the printed indices and radium on the baton hands, and radium was then succeeded by tritium because it was less radioactive. So to clarify, radium was used on watches from 1960, when this Skindiver Nautique was originally produced, up until 1968. So from 1960 to 1968, radium was used, and then from 1968 onwards, tritium succeeded it because tritium was less radioactive. So to clarify, the reason why radium was discontinued was because it was highly radioactive. It has a half-life of 1,600 years. And even now, when radium Lume is 50 to 100 years old, it still has the same level of radioactivity. And although the Lume visually will patinate, and it will change colour to a peach tone with time exponentially, the radioactivity does not decline. So it still has that 1,600 year half-life. So this was produced from 1960. It used radium on the dial. Now, if you look closely, either side of the 6 o'clock index on the dial, you'll note it's true to the original because it says L Swiss made L. This denotes Luminova is used on this piece versus radium, or alternatively tritium. So to clarify, Swiss made pieces from the 1960s would typically say T Swiss made T, and that denotes tritium was used. On the original 1960 Skindiver Nautique, it said RA Swiss made RA. The RA denoted that it used radium versus T for tritium. This uses L for Luminova. Now, strictly speaking, it should say S for Superluminova, but pieces that are loomed with Luminova and Superluminova brands typically use L to denote Luminova versus T for tritium. So that's acceptable. The point is, it will appeal to purist Vulcain collectors because the printing on the dial is exactly the same. It says L Swiss made L, which does look very similar to the RA Swiss made RA used on the original 1960 Skindiver Nautique. Also, it's true to the original with regards to the printing on the dial of the logo. Just bear with me, I'll move the hand out of the way so you can see it better. So at 12 o'clock we have Vulcain, the brand emblem, and Nautique, which is identical to the original 1960 printing of the logo, emblem and model, Nautique. And then we have Inca block and also 25 joules. Now, the original Skindiver Nautique was powered by a calibre which had 17 joules, and it said 17 joules on the dial as a result. This is powered by the ETA calibre 2824-2 automatic, which has 25 joules. So of course they can't print 17 joules as per the original, even though it's a heritage reissue, because that wouldn't make sense. This is powered by a 25 joule movement versus the 17 joule calibre of the original. But the point is, the font is exactly the same. The printing is exactly the same. It's high definition and crisp. The font isn't too thick and blurry. It is a perfect heritage reissue or replica of the original Skindiver Nautique dial from 1960. But of course, modern day enhancement of C3 Superluminova versus the original radium, as I've detailed. Baton hands are correctly proportioned. I like their profiled rather than being flat. Mirror polishing is excellent, and they contrast very well with the vertical satin finishing to the dial. So to clarify, the dial is not glossy enamel blue and it's not matte textured blue. It's got a metallic sheen to it, and it's like the sheen one gets with a sunburst blue dial. That's the kind of metallic finish, but rather than being sunburst pattern, the vertical satin finishing refracts the light vertically rather than in a sunburst pattern, and it's very aesthetically pleasing. So of the two versions, the patina lume or the white lume version, this is the best, and I think the vertical blue dial is just fantastic. It changes from an electric blue to a darker blue depending on light conditions, and it's a gradient dial, so it's slightly darker at the circumference or chapter ring. In the centre it's lighter. Absolutely gorgeous. Now, with regards to the bezel, that's another notable contemporary upgrade. The original Skindiver Nautique from 1960 used an aluminium bezel insert. It did have similar 60-minute ticks, rather like a Rolex 5517 mil-sub bezel. Also had a triangle, also had Arabic numerals at 10, 20, 30, 40 and 50. So this is correct to the original, but however, Vulcain have made the correct decision by updating it to modern day specification. It's now ceramic bezel insert, and they've engraved it with and infilled it with white paint. Now, subjectively, purist Vulcain collectors would be critical of this because they would prefer it use the original aluminium bezel insert with silver 60-minute marks, silver triangles, silver Arabic numerals, with an anodised bezel made from aluminium versus ceramic. But however, this is now contemporary specification. Of course, one gets the benefit of ceramic being harder and more scratch resistant than the original aluminium bezel. Visually, it does look similar, but of course, ceramic does give a more glossy finish. I think they could have refined this. They could have improved the aesthetics of it by making it matte ceramic rather than having a glossy finish which is like enamel black. Because a matte ceramic bezel insert would visually look more aesthetically like a 1960s Skindiver Nautique bezel which was anodised aluminium. But again, this is subjective. Some collectors will like the contemporary look and of course the benefit of it being harder and more scratch resistant. Purist Vulcain collectors will have preferred they used an aluminium bezel insert. It really is divisive. It comes down to whether you prefer contemporary specification or vintage aesthetic, respectively. With regards to the bezel itself, it's solid 316L grade stainless steel, gear tooth profile, mirror polished gear teeth, exactly the same proportions and design as the original Skindiver Nautique bezel from 1960, so it is a faithful heritage reissue of it. It's also partially recessed into the left and the right hand flanks. If you look at the left hand flank, you can see there is a slight recess or scallop, so the bezel is actually partially recessed into the top of the head of the piece. Same on the crown guard side, you can see there's a recess or scallop, so the bezel is slightly recessed into the head of the piece. Again, the benefit of the bezel being slightly recessed into the head of the piece, it reduces the thickness of this piece down to only 12.3, even though it has a 2mm box top pack crystal. One would expect this to be 13mm, bearing in mind it's an automatic, not a quartz or manual wind mechanical movement piece, and also 2mm thick box top pack crystal with 200 meters of hermetic seal. 13mm would be expected. 12.3 is very impressive, and that's the reason why they've recessed the bezel slightly into the case to reduce the thickness of it slightly more, because it allows the sapphire crystal to also be recessed into the head of the piece, and that reduces the thickness from 13 down to 12.3. Excellent. So let's test the bezel execution. 120 click unidirectional bezel, as one would expect. Now again, this is a contemporary modern day specification enhancement or upgrade because of course in the 1960s it predated the use of clicking bezels. So to clarify, in 1960 when the original Skindiver Nautique was produced, bidirectional friction bezels were used on dive pieces. It predated the use of unidirectional 60 click bezels, which were then succeeded with 120 click unidirectional bezels, which you're all familiar with. So the original Vulcain Skindiver Nautique from 1960 would have used a bidirectional friction bezel versus a clicking bezel. This is a notable enhancement. I think they've made the correct decision. It is difficult for brands like Vulcain, when they reproduce a heritage reissue of a 1960 piece, a Skindiver, to get the balance correct between vintage aesthetic, looking like a 1960s piece, and modern day specification, such as upgrades like ceramic bezel insert, sapphire crystal, and 120 click unidirectional bezel, versus an aluminium bezel insert, acrylic crystal, and of course bidirectional friction bezel. I think they've got it correct because visually it looks similar to the original bezel with the white minute ticks for the 60-minute markings, but we have the benefit of 120 click unidirectional bezel execution. Medium resistance, doesn't feel too heavy, doesn't feel too light, that's good. No lateral side-side play whatsoever, no back play whatsoever. Excellent. Feels even all the way through the 360 degrees rotation, doesn't get lighter or heavier. Feels smooth, doesn't feel rough or gritty. One can feel the click spring engaging with every one of the 120 grooves machined into the underside of the gear tooth bezel. Nice, loud, audible clicks. Feels solid, sounds solid, doesn't sound hollow like the bezel is too thin, and I like it. It's partially recessed into the case. It is low profile, but it is still grippy and tactile, even wearing a glove, because of the aggressive profile of the gear teeth. They've made the correct decision, because had they used a scalloped bezel, or alternatively coin edge bezel, it wouldn't have been true to the original. The gear tooth profile of the bezel is true to the original Vulcain Skindiver from 1960, and it does look good, also performs well because it's very grippy and tactile. Let's just check the alignments. Nice, heavy, loud, audible clicks. It feels medium firm, and I really like the execution of it. Just bear with me, and I'll bring it up to 60. One more click. Perfect. The triangle engraved into the ceramic bezel insert perfectly aligns with the 60-minute tick on the chapter ring and the 12 o'clock index on the dial. So alignment is correct. This is an example to other mid-tier brands of how to get bezel execution correct. So to remind you, mid-tier is €500 to €5,000 price point. This is €1,890 on the flat link bracelet. Therefore, it's a mid-tier piece. Doesn't get tighter or looser. Even all the way through the 360 degrees, no lateral side-to-side play, no back play, perfect alignment. It's 10 out of 10. It's the perfect medium bezel execution. Right, so let's check the screw down crown execution. Solid 316L grade stainless steel crown, coin edge finished, and nice large chamfer which deletes the tip of the coin edge teeth. Mirror polished cap to it, and as you can see, it's embossed with the Vulcain emblem to a good standard with high definition embossing. Proportion is correct. It's large enough to be grippy and tactile, but doesn't project too far from the right hand flank, so therefore one can easily get good purchase with one's index finger and thumb. Silky smooth. This is sublime screw down crown execution. Minimal number of turns required. Perfect interface between the internal thread of the stainless steel crown and the external thread of the stainless steel crown tube. So when it's unscrewed, we're now in the manual wind position, and one can manually wind the ETA caliber 2824-2 automatic to its maximum 38-hour power reserve. Feels smooth, doesn't feel rough or gritty. No discernible difference between manually winding a Sellita caliber SW200-1 or a Soprod caliber P024, because they are both clones of the movement used in this piece, the ETA 2824-2. So this is the standard grade of ETA 2824-2 versus the Elaboré or chronometer or top grade versions, but it feels exactly the same. It feels smooth to manually wind. One can feel the tension in the mainspring gradually building up. Now, the negative of this being ETA 2824-2 powered is it does have a phantom date setting position, because the caliber ETA 2824-2 does have a date complication. The date wheel is still present beneath the dial, although we don't have a date window at 3 or 6 o'clock. And when you pull it out to the first click position, that is the date setting position. When you rotate the crown anti-clockwise, you can hear and feel the date wheel clicking over to the next day of the month with the quick set complication. That's the negative of using the ETA 2824-2. Had they used the SW200-1B, that's the no date version of the 1A, which is the date version, that would have deleted the phantom date setting position, but there we are. Pulling it out to the second click position is the final click that hacks the movement. If you look at the second hand, which is needle point, you can see it's now stopped dead, so therefore it's possible to set the time precisely to the second with a caliber ETA 2824-2 automatic. So we're now in the time setting position. Feels smooth clockwise and anti-clockwise. Very light resistance to the gearing, the meshing is very good, minimal backplay, so the machining, the tolerances, build quality, quality control of the gears are excellent. One has to take up some very slight backplay. When you rotate the crown clockwise and anti-clockwise, there's an almost immediate response to the baton minute hand, and that is acceptable. As I've detailed in my previous reviews, some backplay or some slack in the meshing of the gearing is mechanically necessary, because if it did not have that backplay in the meshing of the teeth of the gears, when you push the crown back in, the winding stem entering the movement will cause the baton minute hand to jump out of position rather than remaining static. So one does need some very slight backplay, and that does prevent the winding stem causing the minute hand to jump out of position when the gears move. This is just the right amount. It's got very slight backplay, but feels nice and tight, feels refined, feels smooth, doesn't feel rough or gritty when you set the time. When you move the hands clockwise and anti-clockwise, it feels nice and smooth. Pushing it back in's got a nice positive click, and that restarts the movement. You can see the needle second hand begin to sweep around the white minute ticks on the chapter ring once again at the characteristic smooth 4 Hz sweep. Let's test screwing the crown back down. Instant thread pickup. There's a perfect interface between the internal thread of the stainless steel crown and the external thread of the stainless steel crown tube. Silky smooth. To put this into perspective, it is every bit as smooth as a Tudor Black Bay screw down crown, and this piece visually looks like an Oris 65 or a Tudor Black Bay 58, but in terms of crown execution it's also very similar to an Oris 65 or Tudor Black Bay 58. And one has to remember, the Oris 65 and the Black Bay 58 are more expensive pieces than this piece at $1,858, but it has the same silky smooth crown as the aforementioned. Right, so let's look at the Caseback in detail. So, forged Caseback. Now you'll note, just bear with me, I'll get the camera to focus on it and I'll move the bracelet out of the way and you'll see it better. Right, forged Caseback. You'll know from my previous reviews, I like forged Casebacks. which are hydraulically pressed versus engraved with the embossing. The reason why I like forged casebacks is because it removes the sharp edges. If this had a deep embossed caseback and it were engraved with high definition engraving, the problem is engraving this depth of embossing means that one gets sharp edges to the engraving. And for reference, I'll use the Steinhardt Ocean 139. That does have high definition engraving to the screw down caseback on the Ocean 39. It has Sidon, the Greek god of the sea, and the seahorse. Very aesthetically pleasing visually to look at. Problem is, the engraving is sharp, and this diminishes the comfort level and feel good factor of the Ocean 139 because visually it looks good, the engraving looks sharp and high definition. Problem is, it feels rough, it feels scratchy against the wrist, so therefore comfort level and feel good factor are diminished as a result. With hydraulically forged casebacks like this, as used on the Yema Superman for example, the benefit is the embossing can be deep in 3D profile and then mirror polished with a matte bead blasted background to it, but feels very smooth, doesn't feel rough and sharp, doesn't scratch the wrist as per an engraved embossed caseback. So this is superior, and forged casebacks which are hydraulically pressed are seen on high tier pieces at €5,000+ for that reason, because it does increase production cost per piece and of course reduces profit margin per piece, but the benefit is it's higher quality. Visually looks fantastic, but also feels fantastic, very smooth, and they deserve credit for using a forged caseback. As you can see, it says Vulcain, we have the emblem, and it says since 1858, because as I've detailed, Vulcain have a rich brand heritage. They were founded in 1858 in Switzerland, and it says sold the world over. Vintage aesthetic to it. Now, one detail I like about it is the flat profile to the dodecagon, or 10 sides to the flats, versus using a coin edge circumference or alternatively scallop circumference. We've got these 10 flats which are dodecagon, so this is excellent. The circumference is concentric CNC lathe tool machine to a good standard. It refracts the light, and also engraved with a specification, reference number for the piece and the serial number. Each Skindiver Nautique has a unique serial number, although it's not a numbered limited edition, and the outer circumference is mirror polished to a flawless standard. So caseback finishing of this forged caseback is stellar. This is high tier level finishing. So to remind you, mid tier is €500 to €5,000. This is a mid tier piece, but the caseback is finished to high tier €5,000+ level finishing. Concentric CNC lathe tool machining, hydraulic pressing of the forging to the center, mirror polishing to the outer circumference is all high tier level. Solid end links to the flat link bracelet are well finished, no sharp edges, no burrs, and we've got standard stainless steel spring bars which are acceptable, but of course they could upgrade this to quick release spring bars. That would negate the need for a spring bar tool. Alternatively, they could use pierced lugs with holes in the flanks. That would give the piece a vintage aesthetic, and of course one could simply depress the spring bar externally through the pierced lugs in order to remove the solid end links from the head of the piece. But the original Skindiver Nautique from 1960 did not have pierced lugs, and of course this is true to the original, therefore it will appeal to purist collectors. Underside to head of the piece is concentric CNC lathe tool machine, beautiful brushed satin finish. No sharp edges to the undercuts to the flanks because it has a large chamfer which deletes, large bevel, which deletes the sharp edge. Nice low profile, slender profile to the flanks. It's not a slab-sided piece as per the Black Bay Heritage or Black Bay 58. So it is a very thin piece, it's only 12.3, but visually looks thin because of the large curvature of the undercuts to the flanks, and the flanks being low profile and slender versus slab-sided as per a Black Bay or Black Bay 58. I like the large mirror polished bevels, which mark the transition between the top of the curved lugs, which are brushed satin finished as per the curved profile to the solid end links, and the longitudinal brushed satin finishing to the flanks. To put this into perspective, the quality of the finishing to the head of the piece is equal to a Oris 65, alternatively a Tudor Black Bay 58. Same quality level finishing to the head of the piece, and they deserve credit because this is a less expensive piece than a 65 or a Black Bay 58 respectively, but has the same level of finishing. Brushed satin finishing has a nice fine grained satin finish. Large mirror polished bevels are polished to perfection, and the longitudinal brushed satin finishing to the flanks is perfection personified. Beautiful fine grained satin finishing on the left and the right hand flanks. Excellent quality mirror polishing to the bezel and also the crown and the caseback. Let's look at the bracelet in detail. Now, this Skindiver Nautique is available on a plethora of strap options such as a rubber tropic style strap and also alternative bracelets. Of the strap and bracelet options, this flat link bracelet is the best looking. It gives the piece a vintage aesthetic. It does look like a flat link bracelet from the 1960s, which would have had rivets. Again, they've made the correct decision by making this bracelet without rivets, because I personally dislike rivets on heritage reissue pieces. So to give you an example, the Oris 65 has a rivet link bracelet. And the problem with that piece is the rivet links do not continue all the way to the clasp. For some reason, Oris only put the rivet links on part of the bracelet, and then the rest of the bracelet has removable screw pin links, which are now the industry standard. So that doesn't look good. On the Black Bay and also the Black Bay 58 and also the 54, they have rivet link bracelets. And of course, the rivets aren't real, they are fake. And at the clasp ends, the rivet links are actually screw pins, which are removable, which of course aids resizing the bracelet. But the point I'm making is, rivet link bracelets, which are replicating the original rivet link bracelets used in the 1960s, don't look correct on a contemporary heritage reissue, because the rivet links are not actually rivets. They're not steel bars which have been riveted at either end. They are removable screw pins. This is the problem. So they've made the correct decision, because this flat link bracelet looks like a vintage 1960s flat link bracelet, but of course doesn't have rivets on the flanks. We have the benefit of screw pins, which of course 1.2mm screw pins are easy to resize. So solid end links are correctly profiled for the curvature of the curved lugs. End link articulates freely, doesn't feel stiff or kink. Doesn't have excess longitudinal, lateral, side-to-side, up and down play. Excellent. This is an example to other mid-tier brands of how to get end-link execution correct. The spring bars going through the solid end links in between the lugs are a nice tight fit, interference fit. But the actual pin going through the end link in the flat link bracelet to the end link fitted to the head of the piece is an interference friction fit. Feels smooth, articulates freely, doesn't feel stiff or kink, doesn't have excess play. With regards to the finishing, it is stellar. The luster to this flat link bracelet is fantastic. What we're looking at here is high tier level finishing, €5,000+ level finishing on a mid tier piece. This flat link bracelet is absolutely gorgeous. The luster is incredible. Nice large mirror polished bezels on the edge of the flanks, on the top edge and the low edge. Visually, the mirror polishing to the flanks looks fantastic on the bezels, but also serves a purpose because it deletes the sharp crisp edge from the flat link flanks, and therefore one doesn't get a sharp edge on the top edge or the low edge of the flanks. The large bezels, which are mirror polished, mean that this does not scratch the wrist, doesn't feel rough, doesn't feel abrasive. This enhances the comfort level and feel good factor. Visually looks good, also feels good. Fantastic. And we've got that beautiful luster of the flat links. Articulates freely, doesn't feel stiff or kink. This is fantastic, flows nicely, wraps around the wrist very well, articulates very well, but it's not sloppy. Just bear with me, I'm going to close the clasp and test it. Doesn't feel sloppy, nice and tight. So they've got the balance correct between it's articulating freely and not feeling stiff or kinking, but it's tight enough due to the 1.2mm screw pins. Again, they've made the correct decision here by using screw pins versus push pins, such as split pins or alternatively pin and collars, which would have been a production cost cutting measure in order to maximise profit margin per piece. Let's check the other side for continuity. Again, end link articulates freely, doesn't feel stiff or kink, feels nice and smooth, interference friction fit, doesn't have excess play in any direction, nice and tight, excellent. Bracelet visually is finished to perfection. Beautiful luster, nice fine grained satin finishing to it. Large mirror polished bezels on the edges of the flanks are deburred and chamfered very well, no sharp edges. Articulates freely, flows nicely, doesn't feel stiff or kink, doesn't rattle. This is not a sloppy bracelet, this is outstanding. This is a €5,000+ high tier level flat link bracelet on a mid-tier piece costing $1,858. Vulcain deserve full credit. This looks good, feels good, finished to perfection. Let's look at the clasp in detail. So, visually it does look like a 1960s pressed stainless steel clasp, but it's got a heavier gauge because it's not pressed. This is solid mil 316L grade stainless steel. Nice heavy gauge to it. Again, flawless brush satin finishing to the body, and that contrasts with the flawless mirror polishing to the bezels and also the flanks. 2 button push triggers are circular and mirror polished throughout. No sharp edges, no burrs. Absolutely gorgeous luster to it. Heavily sprung loaded action to the 2 button pushes. Fantastic. Opens freely. Solid mil 316L grade stainless steel internals to the mil clasp. Beautiful lustre to the top side, underside and flanks. No sharp edge to the top edge or lower edge of the flanks. Centred section doesn't have sharp corners. It's been deburred and chamfered very well. Let's check the hinge pins. Left hand hinge pin articulates freely, doesn't feel stiff or kink. Doesn't have excess play in any direction. Centre hinge pin articulates freely, doesn't feel stiff or kink. Doesn't have excess play, feels nice and tight. Finally, right hand hinge pin, which is actually a spring bar, articulates freely, doesn't feel stiff or kink, nice and tight. Pleasant surprise. So left hand, centre, right hand hinge pin, all tight, all interference friction fits. This is an example to other mid-tier brands of how to get mill clasp execution correct. Tolerances are tight. It's not sloppy. Snaps shut with a nice positive click. Feels reliable and robust. 2 button pushers. Nice heavily spring-loaded action. Fantastic. Now, this is a micro adjustment clasp. So let's look at the internals. Now, as you can see, we've got a button push trigger, which is satin finished, and inside the body, they've milled grooves, which are rather like a Rolex glide lock. So one has to depress the pusher with one's index finger or thumb to fully deploy it. It's ratcheting, so let's test clicking it back in. 10mm of on-the-fly adjustment is good. Nice, smooth, heavy clicks. Now, the clicks aren't very loud and audible. It sounds quiet, but they feel fine. They feel refined. So it feels smooth. I like it. And the thing I like about it is the refinement, because you don't have to push in the trigger really hard with your index finger or thumb. Just light pressure is enough. Now, to clarify, it's recessed enough so that wrist pressure isn't going to accidentally depress the button or the trigger, and it won't accidentally deploy with wrist pressure. You've got to press it in with your index finger and thumb to get it to deploy 10mm, but the point I'm making is you don't have to press it in really hard. Sometimes with ratcheting micro adjustment class, you really have to press in the trigger very hard. This feels refined. Nice light clicks. Positive indexing, 10mm is good, and it deploys smoothly. Now, when it's on its full extension, it's not sloppy. There's not a lot of excess play. So this indicates the width of the end link in the bracelet is correct for the internal width of the body. We don't get a lot of play. It's not sloppy, it doesn't rattle. I'm just going to check it on its minimum. Again, end link in the bracelet doesn't feel sloppy, doesn't rattle, doesn't have excess play. Lateral side to side, up and down, or longitudinal play. It feels good. This is refined. Feels smooth when you deploy it. Clicks in with nice fine clicks. I like it. It feels good, works well. You don't have to press the button or the trigger hard, and it deploys very smoothly, and it clicks in with nice, smooth clicks. I like it. The thing I like about it above all else is this is not a bulky micro adjustment clasp. It just looks visually like a vintage 1960 pressed 2-button push clasp. You'd expect this to have 4 micro adjustment holes drilled in the flanks, but that's the proportions of it. So this is good because it's solid milled stainless steel versus pressed, so it's heavier, but they haven't made it too bulky. It's not too long, and therefore this will particularly suit collectors with a smaller 6 to 7 inch wrist. Often micro adjustment clasps are too long, they're too wide, they're too bulky, and they sit too proud from the wrist. Curvature of this is good for a smaller 6 to 7 inch wrist, also good for a 7 to 8 inch wrist, but the point is it's not too bulky, it's not too wide. Again, this is the benefit of using the Perfection Personified 20 to 16 taper. Visually, it looks good, also feels good because it deletes a lot of the meat from the flat link bracelet. Nice, aggressive taper, and of course the other benefit is it's 16 at the clasp end. That means this micro adjustment clasp doesn't need to be wide and bulky as per a 22 to 18 taper, which is the other industry standard. So clasp proportions are excellent. Bracelet is Perfection Personified tapered. So let's do a wrist shot, and I'll show you how it fits on my 8 inch wrist. Now, I haven't sized the bracelet, and I'm pleased to report it fits my 8 inch wrist easily. I can in fact slide an index finger beneath the bracelet and clasp at all times. This indicates this will fit up to a maximum 8.5 inch wrist size. To clarify, there are enough removable links on the 6 and the 12 o'clock side of the flat link bracelet to size this down to a minimum 6 inch wrist size and up to a maximum 8.5 inch wrist size. And bear in mind that is on its maximum deployance extension of 10mm in the micro adjustment clasp. So 6 to 8.5 inches, and as you can see, curvature of the clasp is good. It's not too long. There's going to be no overhang if you have a smaller 6 to 7 inch wrist, which is good, but even on a large 7 to 8 inch wrist, you can see curvature is good. It doesn't stick out too proud, it's not too wide, it's not too bulky. Curvature is nice. I like that it's compact, and visually it does look like a pressed vintage 1960 2-button push clasp, but of course we have the added contemporary benefit of it being ratcheting micro adjustment, on the fly adjustment. Beautiful luster to it. I like the mirror polished bevels machined into the edges and the mirror polished flanks. Beautiful. The luster of this flat link bracelet is just fantastic. Makes a pleasant, refreshing change from oyster style bracelets, beads of rice bracelets, or alternatively Jubilee style bracelets, which are the default option for mid-tier brands. I'm pleased to see Vulcain use something different. Now they do also offer this on alternative bracelets and of course a plethora of straps, but this flat link bracelet is clearly the best choice. It gives the piece a real 1960 vintage aesthetic as per the original Skindiver Nautique from 1960. It's the kind of flat link bracelet one would expect. Of course, the original flat link bracelets from the 1960s used rivet links, but this has the modern day contemporary upgrade of screw pins. But you can see, just look at it, absolutely gorgeous luster. This looks fantastic from every angle. Flat link bracelet really complements the vintage aesthetic and proportions of the head of the piece. So 38mm is correct because that is similar to the original Skindiver Nautique from 1960. 36, 37 and 38 were popular sizes in the 1960s. By contemporary standards, 36 would be considered small for a dive piece, but they were using 36, 37 and 38 in the 1960s. 38 would have actually been considered a large dive piece in 1960, but in contemporary standards, 38 and 39 are popular. One thing I like about it is the compact lug-to-lug, 44.5. Now, you'll know from my previous reviews, the sweet spot that I often refer to is 48. 48 lug-to-lug is the perfect sweet spot, regardless of whether you have a 6 to 7 inch wrist or a 7 to 8 inch wrist respectively. So at 44.5, this is well below the 48 sweet spot. But I'm not going to be critical of it because clearly this is 38. It's intended for collectors with a smaller wrist of 6 to 7 inches versus collectors with a 7 to 8 inch wrist plus. Now, it does have the vintage proportions of the original Skindiver Nautique from 1960, which also had a compact lug-to-lug. 44.5 does look correct for a heritage reissue of the Skindiver Nautique. I'm not going to be critical of it. Above all else, what I like about this piece is how thin it is. Low profile flanks visually look very aesthetically pleasing. They're not tall slab-sided flanks as per a Black Bay Heritage or a Black Bay 58. This is more slender. Has a nice flat profile to the caseback, even though it's 200 metres of hermetic seal. Nice curvature to the undercuts, minimal gap beneath the tips of the lugs, and the end link in the bracelet is correctly profiled because it pulls the flat link in the end of the flat link bracelet close to the wrist. We don't have a large gap beneath the tips of the lugs or the end of the flat link bracelet. This is only 12.3. And as I've detailed, that's very impressive because this is not a quartz powered piece or a mechanical manual wind powered piece. We're looking at an automatic with a rotor. And of course the ETA 2824-2 is a thick caliber, rather like the SW200-1 and the P024, which are clones of it. It does have an automatic rotor, and the problem is it does need adequate clearance beneath the rotor, in between the rotor and the caseback, to prevent the rotor fouling the caseback. But Vulcain have done a good job here because the caseback isn't deep and bubble back profiled, it's low profile and flat. This piece is only 12.3. That's the benefit of them recessing the gear tooth bezel partially into the head of the piece. And also they've sunk the the box top hat crystal into the case. It's partially recessed, and they've slimmed this down from 13 down to 12.3, so they've reduced it by 0.7 by recessing the bezel and the crystal into the head of the piece. And this is the level of refinement that I appreciate with Vulcain that other mid-tier brands cannot do. If this were another mid-tier brand, even a Swiss-made piece, this would be 13mm with the ETA 2824-2. There's nothing unusual about that with 200 metres. To get a 200 metre piece down to only 12.3 and powered by the ETA 2824-2 is a credit to Vulcain. This is the refinement I like about this piece. It's very low profile. Comfort level is 10 out of 10. Feel good factor is 10 out of 10. Visually, this watch looks fantastic from every angle. I like the vintage aesthetic of the box top hat crystal. Looks like an acrylic crystal from the 1960s. Gear tooth bezel is low profile. And yes, it is more aggressive looking than a coin edge bezel or scalloped bezel, but it looks true to the original Skindiver. Subjectively, I think this would look better with an aluminium bezel insert, as per the original 1960 Skindiver Nautique, but this is subjective. Some collectors would argue ceramic is harder and more scratch resistant. They were correct to upgrade it. Really comes down to which you prefer. I prefer the anodised black with silver minute ticks on a heritage reissue piece, but of course I appreciate ceramic is better in terms of its durability. But visually looks fantastic. The vertical satin finishing to the blue dial is just beautiful. I love the way it changes in the centre from an electric blue to a darker blue. It's just a gorgeous looking piece, and the white Lume version is definitely the choice versus the patina tone. The patina tone does look like the radium Lume used on the original 1960 Skindiver Nautique, which is patinated from 1960 to the present day. But I think the white C3 Superluminova in daylight looks better. It contrasts very well with the vertical satin finished dial versus the patina Lume. So it depends on which you prefer, patina Lume or white's Lume. I prefer white. I think it's better looking. But the flat link bracelet on the head of the piece just looks fantastic. I love the luster of it, and it just is a refreshing change from Jubilee style, beads of rice, or alternatively oyster style bracelets. Nice to see they've come up with something different, and of course flat link bracelets were popular in the 1960s, so it does fit the aesthetic of the 1960 original Skindiver Nautique. Feel good factor and comfort level are fantastic, and the bracelet is very comfortable. No sharp edges, doesn't pull arm hairs. It's finished to perfection, high tier level finishing. Right, so let's do a Lume test and we'll see how the Lume performs when it's charged up to the absolute maximum. So as always, I'm going to use my 100 UV LED torch to charge it up to the absolute peak. So this uses C3 Superluminova, and as I've detailed, the blue version of the Skindiver Nautique we're looking at has two different versions of the blue. You can have patina tone C3 or you can have white C3. Of the two versions, I think the white version is better, but they both use the same C3 Superluminova. The only difference is visually one looks peach toned, one looks white. Right, so that's now fully charged, and as you can see, it has not disappointed. We're clearly looking at 5 to 6 layers on the printed indices, 5 to 6 layers on the baton hands. Perfect colour tone match between the dial and hands, same green tone of the C3. Correct choice using C3 versus using BGW9 or X1, for example. X1 would be white or whiter, and of course C1 would have been a lighter green, and had they used BGW9 it would have glowed blue. But C3 does look visually similar to the green tone that radium used on the original 1960 Skindiver Nautique, how it looked. And of course, as I've detailed, it was highly radioactive because it has a half-life of 1,600 years. So radium was used from 1960 to 1968, and then it was succeeded by tritium, which was less radioactive. But both radium and tritium had the same green tone when they glowed in the dark. And this C3 does replicate that. Now, although we have 5 to 6 layers, the potency of the exciter on the baton hands looks more potent. And that indicates we have 5 to 6, but they've applied more layers on the baton hands than on the printed indices, as you can see. Initially, the potency of the exciter on the printed indices looks the same, but you can see the baton hands are glowing brighter. The exciter has more potency. So I think what we're looking at here is more layers applied to the baton hands than on the dial. We could possibly got, I would say, 6 layers on the hands and possibly 5 layers on the printed indices, because the potency of the exciter is telling me it's not as bright on the dial as it is on the baton hands. Good colour tone match, but you can see the dial isn't holding the charge as long as the baton hands. The camera's struggling to autofocus on the dial more than the hands, but of course one has to appreciate the hands are closer to the sapphire crystal, of course. Now this is the negative of printed indices versus applied indices. So to clarify, for example, on a Submariner we have white skulls applied indices, and the depth of the applied indices mean that a full 6 layers can be infilled into the applied indices. But with printed indices, of course, they're printed onto the dial rather than engraving into indices, and therefore it's more difficult to apply 5 to 6 layers, because if you apply too many layers, what can happen with the hands, the hour hand, which obviously runs closest to the dial, it can run and scuff the indices or alternatively scuff the lume. So you have to think about the clearance of the hand stack height on the cannon pinion. So I think this is good, but I think there's room for improvement with regards to the printed indices on the dial. I'd like to see an additional 1 to 2 layers on the dial. On the hands, I think it's acceptable. It's stellar performance. We're looking at a full 5 to 6. But I think there's room for improvement with the dial, because the camera's struggling to autofocus on it. Just bear with me, I'll get it to focus there. Colour tone match is good, but you can see the potency of the exciter on the hands is better than the dial. I think they've applied more layers. So I think what we're looking at is 5 layers on the dial, 6 layers on the hands, and they really need to equalise that, as you can see. Initially, potency looks equal, but the hands have more. By good performance, I think they could improve upon it, but I think it's acceptable. Right, so let's discuss the movement used, because it's my favourite aspect of the piece. So you'll all be familiar with the ETA calibre 2824-2, which is one of my personal favourite Swiss calibers. It's a reliable, well-proven workhorse Swiss calibre, and it's the one that the SW200-1 and the Sopro calibre P024 are clones of. The ETA 2824-2 is the original. It's been produced and in service since 1982, so it's had an incredibly long production run from 1982 to the present day. Therefore, its reliability is proven beyond question. No reliability issues whatsoever reported. It has 25 joules. It runs at 28,800 vibrations per hour and a frequency of 4 Hz. Has hand winding and hacking, which use for complications and work well as I've demonstrated. The negative of the ETA 2824-2 is it does have a date complication, and therefore it does have a phantom date setting position on the crown, which, as I've demonstrated, is a negative. Subjectively, one could argue the ETA 284-2 has a date complication, so why didn't Vulcain utilise that? And they could have put a date complication at 3 o'clock or 6 o'clock, the default positions. Purist Vulcain collectors would argue that if they used a date window at 3 or 6, that would have spoiled the symmetry of the dial, and it wouldn't be a true heritage reissue of the 1960 Skindiver Nautique, because that did not have a date complication. There was no date window at 3, there was no date window at 6. This dial layout is a true replication of the original 1960 dial layout, even down to L Swiss made L being close to the original RA Swiss made RA, which, as I've detailed, denoted radium versus luminova. So dial is true to the original. Purists will prefer it. I would prefer they had used the Solita caliber SW200-1B, which is the no date version of the 1A dates version, because that would have deleted the phantom date setting position. But I do like the ETA 2824-2 due to its reliability and accuracy. I think it's acceptable to have a phantom date setting position, but that's something to be mindful of. 38-hour power reserve is perfectly acceptable. Standard grade of ETA 2824-2 has a stated accuracy of plus or minus 12 to plus or minus 30 seconds per day, so rather wide accuracy range. However, I'm pleased to report that Vulcain are doing a very good job of regulating the calibers they're using. This one is running consistently at plus 2 seconds per day, which is actually within COSC chronometer limits of minus 4 to plus 6. So plus 2 is well within the stated accuracy of plus or minus 12 to plus or minus 30 for a standard grade ETA 2824-2. It's actually within chronometer or top grade ETA 2824-2 specifications, minus 4 to plus 6. So plus 2 is very impressive. That's what I like about it. It's reliable, hand winding works well, hacking works well, setting the time works well, and of course plus 2 seconds per day is chronometer accurate. It's the correct choice of caliber for this piece at this price point. Excellent choice. What we're looking at is a Swiss made piece with a Swiss made caliber. It's the correct choice. No negative to it whatsoever. As I've detailed, it's been in service since 1982, incredibly long production run, very reliable, very accurate. So last, I'll summarise the piece. What do I think of it overall? Well, when I'm considering reviewing a watch on my channel, the watch meets 2 criteria. It should be both excellent quality and excellent value at the respective price point. So mid-tier piece, price point is €1,890 on this flat link bracelet. Yes, I'm going to declare it excellent quality. However, value I'm going to say is okay. I'm not going to say good value, and I'm not going to say excellent value at €1,890, because this does face some stiff competition from other Swiss mid-tier brands using the same specifications, using the same quality of movement, such as the ETA 2824-2, and therefore I can only say it's okay value. I would like to see Vulcain reduce the price to below €1,500 price point. So to remind you, mid-tier is €500 to €5,000. At €1,890, yes, it is a mid-tier piece, but I think the price point is slightly too high in the mid-tier. Below €1,500 would be more competitive with other mid-tier Swiss brands and also mid-tier Swiss micro brands using the same movement and specification. But, however, one has to remember Vulcain do have brand heritage since 1858 in Switzerland. The brand heritage does add value to the piece. The other thing that adds value to this piece is this is a heritage reissue of the Skindiver Nautique produced in 1960. We're not looking at an homage. this is a true heritage reissue of a piece that was produced in 1960. So it does have that pedigree behind it. It has the brand heritage since 1858 in Switzerland. Also, the Skindiver Nautique itself has that heritage, it has that pedigree behind it, produced in 1960. This is a faithful heritage reissue of it, made to modern day specifications versus the 1960 specification. So that does add value to the piece, and that therefore justifies the price, but I still think 1500 would be better. On a positive note, it is significantly less expensive than the Oris 65 and also the Tudor Black Bay 58, which it does go directly head to head to within the mid tier. So in terms of quality, I regard it as equal quality to an Oris 65. I regard it as equal quality to a Tudor Black Bay 58. But of course less expensive, and the quality is excellent, but I just think in order to make the value good or excellent, it needs to be €1,500 or below. 1,890 is expensive. So I'm going to recommend it to you for consideration. I hope you've enjoyed my review of the Vulcain Skindiver Nautique. Please feel free to post your comments below the video. Thank you for watching.